Dilip Kumar, Part 5. As Ayub Sahab grew up, he developed a respiratory disorder which necessitated our moving to Devlali, a hill station in Maharashtra located about 180 kilometers from Bombay. The fresh air in Devlali and the availability of medical care there made it the ideal location for his treatment and recovery. Being an army station, Devlali had good educational institutions, and one of them was Barnes School, where I was admitted. There were soldiers who did not seem to be of Indian origin at the army centers. I learned later that they were Turkish who were captives of war. Deulali is of significance in my life in more than one aspect. First, it was at Deulali that I learned the English language and became quite proficient in it. Secondly, it was during our stay in Deulali that I began to take keen interest in soccer. Agaji visited us once a week from Mumbai. He loved my brother Ayub and was very concerned about his progress. He found me reading and writing English, and that was also something that gladdened his heart. There was an English poem that I learned in school, which I recited before Agaji one day, and he was so happy that he made me recite it before all his distinguished English speaking friends. The poem ran as follows: I have two eyes, and I can see the door, the ceiling, the wall, and the big blue sky bent over all. During school vacations, when we went to Peshawar to spend time with our Dada and Dadi, there used to be social gatherings to mark our visits. At each gathering, I was made to stand on a platform and vigorously egged on to recite the poem. It gave Agaji great pride to tell the world that his son was conversant with English, and all his Pathan friends were equally joyous about the achievement. If there happened to be an English officer of some rank in the local administration in the gathering, it made the scenario even more thrilling. Each time I completed the recitation, there would be encores. There would be cries of Shahbash, well done, Yusuf, well done. Each time I had to start all over again. The encores came again and again, and I would straighten myself, take a deep breath, and begin reciting the same poem once again. The recitation went on endlessly till I was tired and just could not continue. For me, it was something I always tried to wriggle out of. As a shy, reticent youngster, public attention was the last thing I wanted. But I think destiny had already begun to chart out the life I had to lead. I had to obey Agaji's orders on such occasions, and though it was difficult to recite the poem in the open air, no door, no wall, no ceiling. I think I was stimulated to perform by the applause and encores I received. It was as if I could see a door, a wall, and a ceiling when I recited. I had my first brush with the make believe world into which I was to make my fateful entry years later. At Devlali, Ayub Sahab had no option but to spend his waking hours reading whatever Urdu literature he could lay his hands on. He always liked to read the latest novels and he devoured newspaper articles and short stories with great delight. To make him happy, as I grew up and progressed in my study of English, I read the short stories in translation of the 19th century French writer Guy de Maupassant and narrated them to him. That was my first introduction to published literature from abroad, and I was fascinated by the plot structure and storytelling ability of the author. In a latent sort of way, I was developing a keen narrative skill by reading the works of English and other European authors that I found in the library of Barnes School. I can't recall when exactly, but Ayub Sahab suffered a spinal injury after he fell from a horse in Kashmir, where Agaji had taken him and Nur Sahab on one of his business trips. Fruits that were of typical Kashmir origin had interested Agaji, and he made quite a few trips in a year to negotiate and make arrangements for their transport to Bombay. As a result of the injury, Ayub Sahab had to stay in bed or just sit in a wheelchair for almost a year. Orthopedic treatment was not as advanced as it is today, and such injuries took time to be healed. I remember how Agaji used to sit by Ayub Sahab's side and look at him with moist eyes that betrayed his pain within. Here was a son gifted with unusual intelligence and creative energy, and he just could not move from his chair. Relatives of my parents who visited us at Deolali were not many. Among them, I remember an uncle, Ghulam Muhammad, who seemed well acquainted with Urdu poetry and spent time with Ayub Sahab, appreciating the Urdu verses that Ayub Sahab penned. I had a classmate who was the school bully. He was twice my size and he made it a point to threaten me and my small circle of friends. On the way to school, there was a plateau where we played. I had a cycle which I rode to school sometimes, and at other times, I just ran to school, taking off on my feet swiftly with the breeze as if one was being airlifted from the ground. It was an experience I really enjoyed. I get back to the school bully. He was the local baker's son. The bakery owned by his father was well known. One day, while I was returning from school, he sprang on me and began punching me. I was alone and I took the beating without attempting to retaliate. Days later, my friends and I cornered him and really gave it to him. It became a major talking point amongst the boys. What he did to me only I knew, but what we, that is, my friends and I, did to him became known to all. His father was away at the time, so we knew that the news had not reached the principal. The same weekend, Agaji was expected, and I was sent by Amma to fetch him from the railway station. At the station, my opponent, the bully, was waiting for his dad, who was traveling by the same train. When Agaji alighted, the baker also stepped down. I walked silently behind Agaji, a strapping 6-footer with broad, heavy shoulders, while the bully walked sheepishly behind his small built father. The next morning, when I encountered him on my way to school, he seemed to be in a hurry to go out of my sight. He quickened his pace and started to run. He was behaving as if he was afraid of me. My friends who were walking with me noticed the change in him. That afternoon, as we made our way home, my friends and I found a place to hide at the foot of the hill. We waited for him. He had stayed back in the class pretending that he had something to do. After a few minutes of waiting, we saw him coming. He was alone. As he came closer, I could feel my heartbeat quickening. The next instant, we surrounded him. There was the kind of fisticuffs that children have with their opponents at that age. I returned home feeling triumphant but unusually silent. I heard Agaji asking Amma what was wrong with me. Why is he so quiet? Just feel his brow and see if he is alright. I heard him saying after he passed my room and entered his room where Amma was frantically searching for something she had misplaced. Amma, of course, knew better. I hope you have not done something you want to hide from me, she said in her usual gentle voice. I simply shook my head, keeping my gaze on the floor till she left. As always, she had some work in the kitchen or the garden or the backyard to attend to. I imagined what would transpire in school the next day. The principal would get a complaint and I would be summoned along with my friends. I sincerely wished I had not behaved as I did. My peace loving conscience was in a turmoil. Moreover, a Pathan in me was rather uncomfortable about the way we caught him alone, unaware, and retaliated. I reached school somewhat early the next day. I saw the baker and his son in the principal's room. After an exchange of words, they came out and the boy was asked to go to his class. In a little while, I saw Agaji walking straight and erect, rather briskly towards the principal's office. He too exchanged a few words and came out. I waited breathlessly, wondering what had brought Agaji to my school. To my surprise, the principal too came out and they were all talking and shaking hands. The boy's father was all respect as he stood before Agaji, listening to whatever Agaji was saying. In the end, Agaji patted the baker on his shoulder and they walked out of school together. I went to my classroom and took my seat in the first row. I looked at my friends and they seemed to be happy. I then looked at the boy and, to my surprise, he smiled at me. When school broke, he walked home with us, laughing and talking as if nothing had happened. As a boy, I was extremely happy in the green surroundings in Deulali. Having spent a free spirited childhood in Peshawar, wandering gleefully in open spaces, breathing fresh air, stopping by the brooks and streams in the valleys, it was sheer delight to be in Deulali. When we had arrived there, I had this strange feeling that I may just relive my happy childhood in Peshawar. The earth, brown and red in parts, smelled as good as the earth back home, and the hills, craggy and verdant in the monsoon, filled my boyish heart with nostalgia. The climate was perfect, and we had flowers and fruits in the trees in our garden, which was tended to by a jovial Mali and his wife who spoke a Uttar Pradesh dialect which fascinated me. Many years later, when I began to work on the dialogues of the film Ganga Jamuna, which was released in 1961, it was this dialect that came to my mind and ears repeatedly. Amma often sent me to the Mali's house to either summon him urgently or to deliver a portion of the goodies Agajis would bring from Bombay for us. Amma was always generous towards those who served us. She always spoke gently and kindly. Even when we got annoyed and reprimanded them, she did so without hurting their self esteem. Devlali, a picturesque place, figured prominently in my imagination when we got down to detailing locations in the screenplay of Ganga Jamuna. The hills, the plains, and the thick groves made up of all varieties of woodland trees lining the banks of the winding streams sprang up before my eyes when I pictured the locations for Ganga Jamuna in my mind. In retrospect, I feel Deolali provided as much impetus to my creative thoughts as the lands and forts, mountains and valleys of Peshawar when I sketched the rugged setting of Ganga Jamuna's core conflicts and dramatic scenes. I am inclined to subscribe to the belief that childhood images cling to the subconscious surreptitiously and they can emerge before your eyes quite unexpectedly, like an unexpected visitor who sneaks in through the back door to give you a lovely surprise. During our search for the outdoor locales of Ganga Jamuna, I visited some of my childhood haunts, and though a great deal had changed in the environs, I felt extremely happy taking deep breaths of the familiar air. The cantonment was unchanged. I instantly recalled how I used to gaze at the officers in their smart uniforms and sometimes wondered how they mounted the horses so quickly and rode them with such poise and confidence. I was fascinated by the houses of the English officers with their well kept lawns, trimmed hedges, mango trees, wild raspberry and blackberry bushes. There were English flowering plants and the Indian hibiscus, as also roses of various hues and sizes. Our own house was large and we had a flower garden in front and a kitchen garden in the rear. Like the English ladies who sat in the verandas of their houses with their knitting, Amma and the aunts who came visiting from Peshawar too sat in the veranda of our house enjoying the warmth of the afternoon sun in the winter months, doing embroidery or crisscrossing fine needles and producing beautiful laces. Devlali and Pune are of special significance in my life. If Devlali restored the abandon of my early childhood in Peshawar with its plains and hills and valleys, Pune gave me a sense of self assurance and the initial opportunity to develop my character. When the doctors felt Ayub Sahab was doing better, Agaji shifted us back to Bombay and we were back in our house near Crawford Market. Amma was once again cleaning up the big apartment, though she had servants now to help her. Amma was suffering from asthma and she had frightening bouts of breathlessness off and on. It was not just for my education that Agaji had to find resources. All my younger brothers and sisters had to be educated as well. The recession was setting in as I began attending high school and then Khalsa College in Matunga, a locality in central Bombay. It was easy to walk to Anjuman Islam from home, but the only way to reach Khalsa College was by taking a tram ride. I do not remember now as to where I boarded the electric tram every day. Perhaps it was at Crawford Market, but I have lovely memories of the tram journey terminating at Dadar and the locality in central Bombay. I think it was operated by the BEST, that is Bombay Electric Supply and Transport, which also ran the bus services on the roads. I enjoyed a tram ride more than a bus ride for the leisurely way it meandered through its route and made a lot of noise when it picked up speed. I had friends in college who traveled by tram every day and somehow evaded the conductor who gave the tickets for the journey. They were very triumphant about it. The tram conductors, unlike the bus conductors, were usually laid back, and conscientious commuters like me had to go to the conductor who could be dozing in his seat, wake him up, get an angry stare, and buy a ticket to the destination. I therefore did not blame my friends who commuted ticketless. There were days when I ran on the road keeping pace with the tram, the wind beating against my face for the mere fun and joy of it. When the decision to do away with the tram service in Bombay appeared in the newspapers, I was among the thousands of citizens who felt a pang in the heart. A large number of people reportedly lined the streets between Parel and Dadar to bid farewell to the last tram on the fateful day, that is, 31st March 1964. It made its last journey. Had I not ceased to be the young Yusuf Khan who travelled in the electric trams of Bombay and become the star Dilip Kumar, I would have been one of the spectators of the tram services swan song. For some reason, Agaji had great dreams for me. He wanted me to pursue my education and acquire impressive degrees. His ultimate desire was to see OBE, that is, Order of the British Empire, attached to my name. India was then ruled by the British. He is capable of much more than you think. I overheard him chiding my Amma once. He should not be selling fruits. He should be studying law. He must go abroad and study there. He has the potential to become somebody. I was happy to know from Amma what Agaji thought of me, but it scared me too. Will I be able to measure up to his expectations? I was industrious and diligent by nature. I was sure I could be a successful soccer player if given the encouragement and support to become one. But the OBE, how would I get that? I was an avid reader. I enjoyed reading English and Urdu authors. I was shy and reserved by nature, but I made friends easily with select college students. At the Khalsa College, I met Raj Kapoor after years. Raj Kapoor's grandfather, Diwan Basheshwarnath Kapoor, used to visit us in Peshawar, as noted earlier, and the two families met in Bombay as well, with the lingering warmth and gusto that Pathans are famous for. The joy of speaking the same language, Pushtu, was itself something special for the two families. Agaji had a flair for picking up languages, a forte I have inherited and honed. He could speak Pushtu and the Punjabi spoken by the Punjabi residents of Lahore, as also Persian and Urdu, besides sufficient English to be understood by his Anglophone friends. When we moved to Bombay, he became conversant with Hindustani and Gujarati, which his Memon and Bohra friends spoke. Our residence in Bombay was like an open house for Agaji's and Amma's friends. Close to the building where we lived on Nagdev Street, there were the two-storied houses occupied by Memon and Bohra families. The ladies from those families were very friendly with Amma and my eldest sister Sakina. There was one Memon lady, Baisai Bai, who regularly visited us in the afternoons and carried on long, endless conversations with Amma, punctuated by interludes of hearty laughter. She was very fond of Amma and she embraced me frequently by complimenting me about my looks. The fact is, I could never get over my shyness even after I entered my 20s. I envied Raj Kapoor, who had by then become a friend as their families had once again become close, carrying forward the friendship of the Peshawar days. Raj was always at ease with the girls in the college, and his extrovert nature and natural charm earned him considerable popularity. If there was anything impressive about me at that stage, it was my performance in sports and my acquaintance with English and Urdu literature. On the field, while playing football or hockey, I was completely at ease and focused to the point of forgetting everything else. It was soccer that I loved and wanted to play seriously and professionally. I saved every rupee of my pocket money to buy expensive and comfortable sports shoes from a shop near Metro Cinema. I used to walk to the grounds behind Metro where we played and also had our practice sessions. Akaji did not mind if I went after college to watch a football game at the Cooperage grounds or wherever there was a match being played and if I asked for extra money. He was happy with the thought that the son on whom he had pinned hopes of high education and the OBE was spending as much time in libraries and seldom missed lectures in college. He had made friends with lawyers, doctors, and professors who visited his fruit shop, and he felt proud when they came home and when they spoke to me. I conversed freely and articulately with them. He would send me to their residences with choice fruits, and their wives would drop in with homemade sweets. and other preparations. I never failed to notice the respect they had for Agaji, who was indeed more than a fruit merchant to them and to all those who came in his contact. Though he never had access to formal education, which was absent during his boyhood and youth in Peshawar, he was a man of native wisdom and culture. In poise, demeanor, refinement, and prudence in speech and thought, he was equal to them. Though he was not a native of Bombay and, as such, was an outsider, hailing from a social milieu that had little in common with the urban sophistication and more of the city, Agaji was always confident and assured in the company of his friends from different walks of life. He stood out among them with his impressive appearance. He had a bodily presence and a gait with his head held high that commanded deference. He was also full of Pathan robustness and charm that made him stand out among the local Muslims. Ours was a predominantly Muslim locality, but Agaji had Hindu and Christian friends who had their offices and shops in nearby places such as Bhindi Bazaar, Muhammad Ali Road, Masjid Bandar, and Faidoni Market. There was one good Parsi friend of Agaji who had a shop in the vicinity of Crawford Market from where he purchased crockery for the house as well as for our relatives in Peshawar. He was a genial, good humored man who enjoyed Agaji's company and was a frequent visitor at our house on days when the market was closed. There was also another friend who had a shop where kites of all sizes and colors were sold. He gave the boys in the locality the liberty to bargain and pick up kites at throwaway prices. He had other shops and other businesses and was quite prosperous. January was the month in which the new kites arrived in his shop, and we never wasted time in forming our kite flying groups. It was a sport I enjoyed very much. The terraces would be full of enthusiastic kite flyers in the evenings, and it was always great fun to be a participant in the aerial combats of kites. There was a tingling sense of achievement when my kite sailed past that of an adversary and, after a stiff test of maneuvering skills, succeeded in sending the competitor's kite to the ground. Each time I was hailed for my victory, I felt buoyant and ecstatic. My love for kites and kite flying continued even after I had become busy as an actor and the family moved to a house in Bandra. Among the many big trunks in the basement of our house is one that contained the exquisite kites I had purchased from small towns in Gujarat, Rajasthan, Tamil Nadu, and Andhra Pradesh. At Khalsa College, I had very few friends. Raj Kapoor became a close pal and he used to take me to his house in Matunga, where his father Prithviraj ji and his demure wife kept the doors of the house open all the time as the sons as well as Prithviraj's brothers and her brothers kept coming and going constantly. Prithviraj Ji's imposing personality and his warm, agreeable nature made him a popular resident of the locality. In fact, I felt completely relaxed with Raj's family. The liberal and infectiously friendly Kapoors had no hesitation whatsoever in sharing their heartiness with whoever was willing to absorb it. I would find myself voluntarily participating in the feasting and merriment among the young uncles and nephews without a trace of my shyness. As in all good Indian families, the respect Prithviraj commanded as the head of the family was never lessened by the freedom he gave to his sons and brothers to be their own selves. He did not want them to pretend to be what he wished them to be. He obviously believed in letting his sons grow up as individuals with their individual personality intact. I have gone into all this detailing for a specific purpose. It is meant to inform those readers who may have been misled into imagining that Raj Kapoor and I only professed friendship while a deep professional rivalry brewed between us, that ours was not merely a friendship of two individuals in the same profession, but a bonding that grew from well placed trust and respect. Raj's younger brothers, Shami and Shashi, were in school then. Raj had only that much interest in soccer as most others in the college. The majority of my college friends were interested in cricket, and Raj too was more a keen cricket player than a soccer player. But he played soccer too and was very encouraging when he noticed my dedication and enthusiasm. With his handsome appearance and the twinkle in his blue eyes, he had made friends with many girls, and he played with unusual calm when the girls cheered him. He was a born extrovert and charmer. When he introduced me to the girls from the college and from his class, I spoke less and preferred to let them talk. I always admired the ease with which Raj Kapoor conducted himself in their company, while I hesitated to be in their midst for too long. I remember an occasion when Raj tested my guts by telling me that a beautiful girl studying in the college wanted to be introduced to me, and he pointed to one standing some distance away. He urged me to go and speak to her. There were quite a few boys and girls around us, and Raj kept on urging me to walk up to her. I was extremely embarrassed, and I told him I could not do that with so many eyes staring at me. He then said, "Okay, let us go to the canteen." He signaled to the girl to come to the canteen, and to my dismay, she was right there at the table that Raj was leading me to. I had to speak to her, and I think she realized she would be wasting her time if she chose me to be her friend. She just got up and left after a few minutes. Raj was determined to rid me of my shyness. One evening, he came over to my house and insisted on going to Kolaba for a walk on the promenade opposite the Taj Mahal Hotel. I readily agreed. When we alighted from the bus near the Gateway of India, he said, "Let us take a Tonga ride." I agreed. We boarded a Tonga, and just when the Tongawala was about to prod the horse to get going, Raj stopped him. He noticed two Parsi girls standing on the footpath. They were giggling about something. Raj craned his neck and addressed them in Gujarati that the Parsis speak. The girls turned to him. Very chivalrously and politely, he asked them if he could drop them somewhere. They must have thought he was a Parsi, his fair complexion and good looks being such. They said they would appreciate a lift to the nearby radio club. He asked them to hop in. I was holding my breath in suspense, not knowing what he was up to. The two girls got in, and one of them sat next to Raj while the other sat next to me. I made ample space for the girl to sit comfortably while Raj did nothing of the sort. He had the girl sitting very close to him, and after a minute, they were talking like long lost friends. While I began to squirm with embarrassment, Raj was chatting away merrily. They alighted at the radio club, and I heaved a sigh of relief. It was Raj's way of getting me to feel relaxed in the company of women. He was a natural charmer and he was anything but shy. Yet he was not disrespectful or uncouth. He was plain mischievous. As Prithviraj's son, he had an aura around him and was popular in the college campus. He knew he was heading for a profession in which there was no room for reticence or shyness. I did not have a clue about what was in store for me. All I wanted then was to become the country's best soccer player. I was indeed very serious about preparing for a sports career. Every evening after college, it became a routine for me to go to the grounds behind Metro Cinema and play football with others who were also equally serious about pursuing a career in the sport. There was a shop near Metro from where I purchased my sports shoes and my first cricket bat. Although soccer was my first love, I played cricket too with passion. The athletic side of me was also strong when I participated in school and college athletics. I emerged victorious in every 200 meters race. Agaji was proud of my interest in sports and he patted me on my back whenever I brought home a trophy or a certificate for my achievements in that field. He was fine with all that, but his dream was to see me in a profession like law or in the civil services. I personally felt it was premature for me to disclose to Agaji that I had a desire to become either a soccer champion or a cricketer. I was aware of his dreams for me. I thought maybe I could try my hand at business. In a small way, I always tried to help Agaji in keeping records of the inflow and outflow of revenues. It was not known to me then, as it is with all mortals, that a destiny was being carved for me by the Almighty. Thank you very much.